everyone. So today we're talking about cities, we're talking about people, we're talking about the world, we're talking about Flint, Michigan. So let's start with this. As more than 6 billion people search all over the world every day for shelter, food, fellowship, inspiration, satisfaction, our cities and communities are being transformed. The scale of changes made by our Earth's 6 billion people and hundreds of millions of organizations is hard to imagine. Think about it like this. In the coming decades, we will collectively build and rebuild, use and reuse the equivalent of everything made by human hands from today back to the days thousands of years ago when the first cities were built in the Yangtze, Ganges, Nile, and Tigris and Euphrates river valleys. I believe that glimpses of this process of transformation can be seen today right here in Flint, Michigan, a city and community that has struggled with more than its fair share of rust and bust. The city of Flint has experienced phases of dramatic transformation since its founding in 1855 as it moved from a lumber town to a carriage town to a car town and now moves on to a more diverse and green economy. The collaborative solutions that have been developed here for neighborhood blight, for brownfields and other abandoned properties offer insights into the processes of economic and political and cultural change that are and will continue to be at work in our cities in the 21st century. So let's go back to the global perspective. Economies, cultures, and landscapes are moving and changing faster today than at any other time in human history. As we all go about our daily lives, we are transforming the places we live. With population growth, every year there are more than 100 million more people living in communities around the world. In the next 10 years, nearly as many people will come to the world than the total that walked the earth from the time of Jesus of Nazareth until Thomas Malthus penned his famous essay on the problems of growing populations. The United Nations projects that by 2050, there will be 8.9 billion people in the world, up from just over 6 billion today. Think about that in archaeological terms. Consider all the wonders of the ancient and modern worlds, the day-to-day accoutrements of our lives, our families, our neighborhoods, our businesses. In the next 40 years, we need to accommodate all of this growth and change. We need to build and rebuild the equivalent of everything made by those days of the earliest and first cities. Given the projected consumption patterns and the wear and tear on all of our existing infrastructure, virtually everything we know today must be transformed, reformed, recycled, renovated, and remade in the next 40 years. The industry, creativity, productivity that's going to be required in the 21st century will be extraordinary. To meet these growing demands without ripping apart our planet will require dramatically reducing the rate of waste, reusing what we have, and recycling previously discarded and undervalued items. We will live the history of the multi-million-year human world all over again in the next century. The scale of reform, redevelopment, and recycling that's required is hard to imagine, but again, there are glimpses all around us. Consider Flint. Here we are, Flint, Michigan, place where I was born in 1974. Flint has been the toughest town around since its founding in 1855 and the earliest days of Jacob Smith and his settlement and trading post at the Grand Traverse across the Flint River. What started as a small permanent settlement surrounded by a forest became a bustling city of constant reinvention. Flint first thrived as a lumber town, attracting thousands of new workers and residents, producing one of Michigan's governors. Then Flint moved with the rest of the world and the country into the early industrial age and became the home of the carriage industry. We put the world on horse-pulled wheels and made Flint the vehicle city for producing more carriages than any other city in the world in the first decade of the 20th century. Because of our great entrepreneurs, these carriages became horseless, and a new revolution was started. At home here in Flint, we gave birth to General Motors, the United Auto Workers, and the American middle class. When you think about it, the American 20th century was first made right here in Flint. All because some workers sat down for the rights of their families and communities and won a startling victory in the depths of the Great Depression in February of 1937. Not more than a few hundred yards from where we sit today, Flint was ground zero for dramatic transformations then and continues to be today. So from the great affluence and wealth from our factories to the growing colleges and universities and medical centers today, from the houses not being able to be built fast enough and people hotbedding or sharing a bed around work shifts, to the vacant and abandoned houses and hundreds of acres of so-called brownfields that we have that cover the city today. We're recycling the city. The goal is to create a sustainable 21st century community with new jobs, safe neighborhoods, and great schools. Here's how we're going to do this. Let's take a look at the Habitat for Humanity site. We have thousands of vacant and abandoned properties all over our community. We have hundreds and thousands of acres of brownfields or unused commercial or industrial properties. The Genesee County Land Bank estimates that 32% of all land in the city of Flint is vacant or abandoned, including more than 6,000 residential structures, and all of these have to somehow be renovated, be reformed, be recycled. So the process of recycling the city will be as dramatic as the city's initial years of growth. We're already in that beginning process today. I use the word recycling instead of downsizing or shrinking for a reason. It's undeniable that Flint has lost population. Those living in the 33 square miles that we call Flint, Michigan. It has a smaller population of residents than it once did, but I believe that we live in places. We don't live in population sizes. We experience place through value and quality, not through size. Recycling is a process of discovering value. To recycle literally means to undergo reuse or renewal, to be subject to or suitable for further use or activity. Recycling starts with assets. It requires making success out of failure. I also argue that it's through accelerated by collaboration and community engagement. So here's what this means for Flint as we move forward. We need to revitalize neighborhoods. We need to reuse brownfields. We need to integrate and mix housing and economic development and transportation systems. And this will lead to some greater health outcomes, greater quality of life, and it'll change the way we think about urban space. To give you an idea of how this works, I want to talk about Chevy in the Hole. Just a few hundred yards from here, the former factory sites for General Motors along the Flint River, what's always been the heart of this community, an area that was the location of the first sawmills, the location of the first carriage factories, the location of the sit-down strike that won that historic victory against General Motors. We now need to recycle this area. It sits adjacent to neighborhoods and Kettering University, and the recent opening of the Kettering Innovation Center shows us what can be done in this area. This building is home to the TEDxWorks Business Accelerator, and it's also the center for Michigan's Energy Excellence Center with Swedish Biogas International. This corridor along University Avenue also will connect this part of the community into downtown. We have a new trail that's running along the Flint River. And the most exciting transformations anywhere in the city will take place in these couple square miles over the next few years. One of the things we need is a new name for Chevy in the Hole. We obviously don't make Chevys there anymore, and to me, the hole is a negative connotation. So how do you recycle a hole? Go outside when we're done and take a look at that space. What would you call it? I'd like to hear your suggestions. You can email me at mayor@cityofflint.com. We need to recycle other parts of our city, our neighborhoods, our brownfields, our school buildings, our golf courses. In some cases, we'll be adding density and development. In some cases, properties will become more naturalized or put into an agricultural use so that no one has to pay to mow the grass every week. Recycling the city means turning our failures into successes. We need to take our vacancies and our challenges and turn them into some kind of opportunities through collaboration and community engagement. That's what's happened here in Flint. We've had projects move forward when they have the support of our public sector, our business sector, our faith sector, our nonprofit organizations. And from this perspective, Flint and the surrounding region is succeeding in ways and at a pace that would surprise anyone who hasn't been to this community in recent years. And citizens have led the way. In Flint, we've gone through an extensive process of neighborhood engagement and citizen involvement called Neighborhood Action. We went to every one of the city's 9 wards and all 28 of our neighborhood areas and asked citizens to tell us what their priorities were, what their projects were of most interest to them. And just this week, we received a $1.5 million grant award from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to move forward with master planning, something that this community has not had since 1960. And again, citizens will be part of that process and leading the way. This $1.5 million will be matched with time and money from others in our community. Citizens will be involved every step of the way as we recreate our community. It's vital that as many voices as possible are a part of this process. So let me step back from the story of Flint and say a couple words about what this means for all of our cities. I forecast that the thriving and prosperous cities of the 21st century will combine what we often stereotype as urban, suburban, rural, and even natural areas. Instead of these concentric circles around the core of the city where housing gets less and less dense until it ends in a green ring or rural agricultural use, we'll have a kind of hyper mixed use city where high density housing is stacked next to urban farms and suburban style homes are rebuilt in the core of the city around walkable, dense commercial districts. Our cities will become places of great diversity. And when you look back in time, you know that the cities that have always been the most sustainable, that have always been the most desirable, have been the most diverse. So the myth that we had in the 20th century that you could somehow get along being a one-company town or with a one-size-fits-all philosophy, that has now been finally put to rest. So even in Flint, the place where we were a part of General Motors history and such a big part of that corporation's life in the rest of the world, the largest corporation in the world in the 20th century, we need to embrace that diversity of people, of races, of ideas, of perspectives and values, and make room for all of that right in the city, right in our city. That's the only way that we can build a sustainable community, and other communities around the world will be doing the same thing. Thank you very much.